We're not doing, I guess we're not doing the outdoor segment.
It's raining.
That's not
Yeah, it's too bad, but we've all been running weather. Thank you for coming. I'm Kate Thompson, chair of the Tamworth History Center. It's great to see this place full. I'm just going to say that this event is, we're really glad to have Bob and everybody who's here to talk about Chinook's children and Wonalancet legacy to the world. And especially happy to be doing it right here in Wonalancet. This event's co-sponsored by the Tamworth History Center, the Wonalancet Chapel, the Wonalancet Outdoor Club, and the Wonalancet Preservation Society. And thanks to everybody who helped organize it. I wanted to just say quickly that the Tamworth History Center, for one, we're very excited because our center in the old building we're trying to fix up to be our center in Tamworth Village is really coming along. Brad Streeter and Carl Baer and another guy are there building, getting ready to renovate. So we, I mean, in the middle of renovating, we've already done a whole lot. So we're excited that we will probably have 2 rooms open this summer to help celebrate Tamworth's 250th. And we're pleased because it's been a long haul. And I also just want to quickly mention that the Tamworth History Center, which used to be the Tamworth Historical Society, and we're still not quite sure who we are, but we think we know, is planning in this Tamworth 250th year to do as many programs as we can like this that involve collaborations with other groups in town and celebrate different aspects of the town's history. And we would love to, for instance, sometime in the summer, we want to do one on Native American history going back 9,000 years. And we are thinking about the historic Tamworth Sandwich Quaker neighborhood. Some of you might like to help with that. We're open to all of your ideas. What else? Union Hall Association, Old South Tamworth Movies. We were happy in January to help produce a traditional arts day in Tamworth in conjunction with the farmers market that Sienna Kaplan over there came up with, and we helped get the wonderful Dudley Laughlin country dance caller here. And I won't go on and on. Farming in Wonalancet, just have to throw that one in. Barry Bonica wants to do one about campgrounds. Anyway, I'm going to turn this over to Douglas Vicker to introduce our speaker. Thank you all again for being here. We do have a little picture, an antique blue picture out in the hall, which if you feel like dropping a little something in it, it would go to the Tamworth History Center and all our programs.
So I'm Doug McVicker, and the president of the Wonalancet Preservation Association, or Society. We're actually the association. So my job is to welcome everybody to Wonalancet. Most of you have been here before, but so we had a great overture with Deb Cottrell and her handler Tug. And now we're going to go to the main course, which is a presentation about Chinooks and an analysis and viewing of a very interesting 1939 historical movie by about Chinooks and about dog sled racing, which a lot of it was shot right here in Wonalancet. And the presenter is going to be Bob Cottrell, and I think you've been in this area almost 20 years. So, and originally, I guess, from Florida. But Bob is very highly trained. He is a graduate of the Winter Tour program in Delaware in American Studies. He's a trained curator and also trained in museum management. And I think most of you remember when he came here and got the Remick Museum off to a good start. Now he's the history librarian at the Henny Room at North Conway, where they have an incredible collection of original materials and lots of interesting things about the area. And he's also the curator of the Conway Historical Society and their museum. So very well qualified. I think probably I can safely say that given this whole sort of area from Conway down to Tamworth and into Ossipee, nobody knows more of the history, the general history. A lot of people know more about specific things, but nobody knows more about the general history of the area than Bob does. And if you're doing any kind of research, he's always someone you want to talk to for a good steer. I like his approach to history because he's interested in virtually everything. And I think history is that. It's an interweaving of everything through time. So one of his favorite things is dogs, though, so let's go ahead. Bob.
So this program tonight is a little bit of an experiment. And so I'm going to ask a couple questions so we can help gauge the audience. How many of you saw the film before? I think it was shown a couple years ago. Okay, so a number of you saw it. And so what we're hoping is audience participation. Since you guys really are the experts in the Wonalancet area and probably know who all these people are and stuff like that. So part of it is we want to document that. We are videotaping it and taking notes and stuff so that we can try and figure out stuff, and I'll show you some stuff as we go through it. I thought what we would do is see the film once. It's about 10 minutes, and everybody can just enjoy it, and then we'll go back and we'll go through it sort of scene by scene and kind of analyze it. People can talk about it. The other question I wanted to have or ask is about the parts that will be interpretive, if you will. I need to gauge where you are in terms of history of dog sledding and experience. I know. Raise your hand if you've had experience with sled dogs and involved in that. Okay, so a number of you. Good. So looking forward to that. We'll kind of try and find a good balance between the basics and stuff like that. So, how many of you know which end is the driving bow? Uh-oh. We'll have to bring those. We'll have to bring those sleds in. We have a. Well, I'll talk about those sleds in a little bit. We'll talk about sleds in a minute. So why don't we just watch the film?
Okay. Should we dim the lights?
Yeah, we'll dim the lights and we'll just watch it and everybody enjoy it, and then we'll come back to it.
Weighs 90 to 110 pounds. He is keen and alert, intelligent,
Can you get that
fight
a little higher? Since 1931, Mrs. Julia P. Lombard has been raising Chinook dogs at the Wonalancet kennel.
Can it be louder?
Once a day, she personally carries the food
Maybe if you
to
go
her
to
charge.
that symbol that looks like a speaker,
And eagerly she is awaited for the
It's
cold
the-
mountain
yeah, that
air
one.
with the keen edge on the
click
top.
on that.
Ground meat mixed with puppy crumbs and water.
Yep, and then push that all the way up.
Daily meal.
Oh, the other way. There you
We had to start this movie over again. Too much.
Let out the
There.
dogs for their daily exercise.
Let's do that. All right, let's start over again.
Color. Weighs 90 to 110 pounds. He is keen and alert, intelligent and fierce in spite of his size. Since 1931, Mrs. Julia P. Lombard has been raising Chinook dogs at the Wonalancet kennel. Once a day, she personally carries the food to her charge. And eagerly she is awaited for the cold mountain air puts a keen edge on the dog. Ground meat mixed with puppy crumbs and water usually makes up the daily meal. Mighty satisfying it is, too, according to the... Sometimes fish is substituted for meat. To the kennels to let out the dogs for their daily exercise. Ah, a litter of puppies. 7 squirming little fellows cuddling close to mother and all doing nicely. 10 days old, they look like guinea pigs, but it won't be long before each pup grows up to be a big, strong sled dog. And now mother leads her puppies out into the fresh air and sunshine. They are nearly a month old and can walk pretty steadily, although their hind legs are still a bit wobbly. Somewhat skeptical of the snow at first, its softness soon pleases them. A warm little coat of fluffy fur keeps off the chill and makes playing in the snow lots of fun. Of course, it makes a fella hungry too, and there's nothing like dipping into a dish of hot soup on a cold day. And now, exactly 53 days old, the puppies are growing up. They are more alert, more playful, but still keep pretty close to mother. Still become a little scared when she tries to teach them to be on their own. She soon finds out, though, that it isn't easy to get away from this bunch, not even for a minute. When the dogs are about a year old, their training begins. At first, a jerk line is used to teach them to come when called. But soon he dashes toward the trainer at the command of one word, come, without the aid of any line. And now a harness is put on the dogs, and they are hitched to a sled for the first time. At the called gate or go, they are pulled along the road to demonstrate what the word means. Teaching the dogs to make a complete turn is next. The cry, pause, come in, means turn on the left. G, come in, on the right. The dogs are driven entirely by verbal commands, without reins or halters of any kind. And it doesn't take long for these bright animals to catch on. In spite of general belief, the lead dog is not necessarily the biggest of the team, nor the best fighter. He is, however, invariably the most intelligent. He has many responsibilities in addition to obeying every command. Besides keeping the speed of the dogs up to about 11 or 12 miles an hour, he must know just how sharp a turn can be made without entangling the other dogs and sled. He knows, largely by instinct, whether or not the ice in lake and stream is strong enough to hold the man and sled behind him. And now they've arrived at the ski slope, where the dogs are greeted by none other than Hannes Schneider, one of the greatest skiers of all time, now an exile from his native land. The sled dogs are frequent visitors to the inns of New England in winter. Of course, these friendly animals are a great favorite among the guests, who admire them for their handsome appearance and affectionate disposition. Furthermore, the dogs add greatly to the enjoyment of winter sports. For a fast ride in a cozy sled over the frozen hills is a great thrill, as you may well imagine. With nerves that tingle, they're off. Inside the truck, the Chinooks are going to a race for the annual New England Championship. Although not raised for racing, but rather for pulling power and endurance, their stamina is always a strong factor over a long course. Many teams are entered in this yearly race, which is run over a 20-mile circuit. They take off at 3-minute intervals, and the team making the run in the shortest elapsed time is the winner. Some entries come from 200 miles away. Some drivers are young women who are expert in handling these racers that are raring to go. At the signal, she's off with the wind, off with her huskies as they churn up the snow with their flying feet. The villagers and guests from the neighboring towns take keen interest in the race. Standing at carefully chosen vantage points, they cheer on their favorite team. Waiting at the finish line. The first dog sled comes in, but it is not necessarily the winner, since it is the elapsed time that counts. As another team comes in, waiting in the group is Arthur T. Walton, the first man to bring sled dogs to New England, and who took Chinook and his sons almost to the South Pole. And now, as the drivers and their dogs get a big hand from the audience, Mr. Walden presents a silver cup to the winner. 1 cup, no, 2 cups. No, 3 cups. This is his lucky day. See what happened to the girls, both drivers. Uh-oh, there they are now, coming round the mountain. Well, I declare.
Let's start at the very end. Does anybody know who those 2 ladies are that are racing there?
The 2 young women.
One of them is my mother.
Yeah, I think so. And the other one, do you have any idea?
I think it's Carol Peabody.
Carol Peabody. Is that Peabody Shakurova?
No, they both came up in 1924 and started racing, and they had some reputation of being some of the first women out there.
Okay.
And I recognize my mother.
Yeah.
Sure. And I know
Which one? The front one or the
back one.
back one? Okay.
And she always was with Carol Peabody, so I just think that's likely, but I don't know that for sure.
What was her name?
Who?
Your mother?
Clara Reed, R-E-A-D.
All right. So we have some. I have some slides to help interpret the thing, but I think what we'll do is we'll just start it again, and then we'll stop it. There is a little bit missing at the very beginning. There are 2 different types of versions. There's a silent version that has little titles that come up, and then there's the narrated version, and there's several versions of this. This one is ICS, and Doug has done a lot of research on the distribution and sale and rental. So these were available through, those of you who remember school, and you could have films in the classroom. So these were available with, films about beavers and camels or whatever. They were also part of the newsreels that were done when you went to the films and you watched, Tyrone Powers or somebody like that, and they would show a lot of little shorts, so these were shown. They were also, a really nice high-resolution version that I just discovered recently. Well, it's posted on the internet, it's all on YouTube, and we can get the links on the Historical Society. You can actually play it on your cell phone, which is kind of cool. Is by Sears and Roebuck. So that's kind of, actually, let's see if I can, I don't know what kind of signal we do.
You wanna look at the beginning of the silent one? At the-
Yeah, just, no, not necessarily that. We'll just watch the narrated one again.
Okay.
Let me see if I can, looks like it might. So hold that for a second.
Yeah.
So this is the one that is Sarah Crest, and it's a little different Chinook's Children screenshot. And then here, it says who produced it, Salzburg and Baumstone. So is it tucked away in the, something in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, the tiny hamlet of Wonalancet. All right, so let's, so I don't think that scene's there yet. Let me go to where. So here where snows are very deepest or something like that. Okay, so then you have the guy going across and talks about purebred Chinook dogs, first bird Antarctic expedition. Okay, so right there it says Arthur Walden who crossed the Greenland Husky with a St. Bernard. So there's actually, I can show you some pictures of it. There's actually some stories. We have both the written information from the original couple that created Chinook. Plus we've done DNA analysis of the current Chinook. So there's pretty good mix. The problem is the Greenland Husky, her name was Ningo, and she was a purebred, and she was a descendant of a dog that led Peary to the North Pole. And then of course her son led Bird to the South Pole. The problem is the father, Kim, was a mutt.
Yay.
And he wasn't pedigreed in any way, shape, or form. Walden was looking for specific characteristics. You won't see a lot of Chinooks racing because they used to win the early races when there really wasn't much in the way of competition. But they are actually freight dogs. They're like teamsters. A lot of endurance. Walden used to go a couple hundred miles with them up in Alaska and moving freight literally from the steamships to the gold fields and back. And that's the same thing, that was the roll down in the South Pole. It was loading, unloading, and then reloading gear and putting caches out every 50 or 60 miles. I have done a couple programs before that goes more into the polar expedition, which is kind of neat, and more into the history of Chinook and so on and so forth. So I'll talk about that in just a second. But let's go ahead and watch this a bit, and we'll stop at the...
So do they have St. Bernard in them, or?
They do, but they have a different dog that's most dominant. Okay, so there. Can you go back just a second?
Yep.
This is one of the things I find interesting. And Doug and I were talking about this before. Notice which side the nose comes out, and then it switches. Okay, so this is Julia Lombard going to feed the dogs every day. So go ahead and play that. There we go. Oh, that's okay.
Stop there?
Yeah, well, so the opening's on that side. Now play it. Okay, so that's number one right there. So
Well, might be a different dog in a different cage.
it could very well be. And yeah, I'll freeze it there for a second. So we've worked with some different filmmakers. Is Melody here? Yeah, we actually have a soon-to-be film star in town. I can't really say much about it, but there is going to be a film coming out. And like this, there's a lot of footage shot, and then it's edited together. So that's one of the interesting things, I think, about analyzing film, is obviously it's two different doghouses. Or Doug was thinking maybe when they were splicing the film, because they used to physically splice the film together, they might have put the negative backwards. Then when they printed it, no one really noticed. You might have seen, there's all these whole websites of bloopers in different movies. What's the Lord of the Rings? There's a certain angle and the shot goes like this, and there's some guy driving a car in the background. And there's something, The Patriot, I think it is, and it's supposed to be the Revolutionary War or whatever, and they have this shot, and there's an airplane flying around. So there's a lot of that. The other thing is about the size. Now you see this picture here. That was actually featured in the book that's there, and it was taken by a photographer in Conway, and that's like the most famous picture of what we call the Great Chinook, which is the original Chinook. And that was the one that was used for the markers that you see on the Chinook Trail. And you can see how huge his head was. And his body was very big and blocky. This film talks about 90 to 100 pounds. Tug's more like 70. However, that looks a lot more like Tug. In a better resolution, you can see what is now the breed standard, his ribs. And we're now breeding for sinuousness, I guess is the term they use, that helps with that endurance. So, the breeders are trying to find that right balance between size and weight and strength and endurance and so on and so forth. So the older ones that were more work dogs, whereas our dogs are more sort of recreational, were bigger. Now, there's two groups, and Tug comes from the genotype. We'll talk about that a little bit. So he is DNA, genetics from the Great Chinook. But there are other people who are breeding what we call Chinook-alikes. They're trying to make dogs that look like Chinook. So they will outbreed them to St. Bernards and other dogs. And so you see these bigger dogs. So the question is, do you want the direct descendant or do you want a dog that looks like the original? Okay, so any questions at this point? Okay, so we'll move on.
Since 1931, Mrs. Julia P. Lombard has been raising Chinook dogs at the Wonalancet.
Just stop it again. So she just said 1931. Since 1931, she was raising the dogs at this kennel, Wonalancet Hubbard Kennels. Now you notice I didn't say Chinook kennels. So it was not the Chinook kennels. It was the Wonalancet Hubbard Kennels. Go ahead, you had a question?
I was going to ask the date difference between that photo and this film footage. How many years apart are they? Roughly.
Let's see. This book was published in 30. So this book was actually published. So they mentioned that book was published in 30, so it would have been compiled and put together in 29. She talks about the expedition, so it would have to be late in the year of 29 or 30 because they left here in August of 28 and they came back in December of 29, or November of 29, I think. And the other thing is she sold the kennel in 39, so it's somewhere between 1931 and 1939. However, I think it's either 1938 or 1939 because of some of the other pictures that are down the road.
The movie, definitely 39.
Okay,
Yeah.
39, yep. Any other questions before we?
Do we know where it was located, or are we going to guess that shortly?
I don't know, does anyone hazard a guess? Okay, we got a person here, stand up and tell us where you think this was filmed. Gee, I have no idea where it could be.
That would be the house right there. And that's the front of the house.
Where is it?
It's my house. It's half mile down the road.
In which?
It was still open.
Yes.
Paul King now owns what was the Wonalancet Hubbard Kennels. Now, some of you guys might be able to help fill in the blanks. We actually have a solution to a very interesting question that's sitting on the altar right now, but which I'll tell you about in a little bit. But so what happened is when Walden came back from the South Pole, Chinook, and I don't know how much you guys know about the history, but Chinook died down there. He was left down there. There's all. I don't mean to cast aspersions on anybody, but what I heard is that Walden was never one to let facts get in the way of a good story. And so I have seen different versions of the story of how Chinook passed away. Everything from he was ganged up by 3 younger dogs and lost the fight, and then said basically to himself that he wasn't going to be the lead dog, he wasn't, he's just going to go off into the snow. And then other ones were like, he just was tired, or he got lost in a snowstorm. There seems to be a lot of different stories. Anybody have anything to say about that? Did anybody hear anything from Walden or Walden's descendants as to what actually happened? But, so he was unharnessed, and the collector, who, Rick Skoglund, has the last harness that Chinook wore, and is now at the New Hampshire Historical Society. And we were hoping to have it here next year, because January 17th, 2017 is 100 years from the day that Chinook was born. And he died on his 12th birthday. So there's just a little bit of that. So does anybody want to guess, or does anybody know where Chinook was actually born? Some people do, I'm sure. Okay, so probably most of you came up and you saw the Chinook kennels, or you've seen the Chinook kennels. Historic marker, Chinook kennels. That picture, painted, big sign, Chinook kennels. They never raised Chinooks at the Chinook kennels. Yeah. So, Chinook was born right over there.
From across the river, was he born?
Yep, right over there.
Yeah, when I was a kid, we used to play over in there with the dogs.
So Walden bred the
Where's
group
right over there?
just a couple houses over, or
Wade's house.
2 buildings, yeah.
Wonalancet farm.
Where Amy was.
Yeah.
Where Amy Sims lives there, it's across the river and it's red. I think.
Yep. And so then, when Walden came back, and this is part of the story that I haven't been able to document, I've read what Seeley, Eva Seeley, Short Seeley, how many of you knew her? Raise your hand if you knew. Okay, Eva Short Seeley. Somehow, she had the rights, or whatever, to use the famous name Chinook Kennels, and the image, the famous image. But the DNA, the breeding of the Chinook dogs, was over here with Julia Lombard. She could not call it the Chinook Kennels. She called it the Wonalancet Hubbard Kennels, and the Hubbard comes from one of their sponsors, which is the Mother Hubbard Dog Food Company out of Gloucester, Massachusetts. And so we'll see some pictures and stuff like that. So this, but they did have, when they went to sportsman shows and stuff like that, they were able to say, which was true, they were the world's only, the exclusive breeder of Chinooks. And then later on, we went to Perry Green in Maine in 1939, and then it has since, there's a whole history of that. But anyway, let's go ahead and see more. I think that's a chicken coop.
Carries the food to her charges. And eagerly she is awaited.
Tug does that.
Mountain air puts a keen edge on the thought. Ground meat mixed with puppy crumbs and water usually makes up the daily.
So she's pulled a sled with dog food in it.
According to the sometimes fish is substituted for
And that's exactly how Tug eats. Okay, can you stop for a second?
for their daily exercise.
Whoop.
Back?
Yeah, if you can back up just a smidge.
Try it.
I don't know if you can do that. So, are any of the buildings still there? They're all gone in. So while we're looking for it, we're looking for the building across the street.
More?
Yeah, we want to see the building across the street. Right there, that's good. All right, anybody want to tell me about the building across the street? Anybody know that?
Is that the average?
No.
No. Yes.
Yeah, it's a huge house. Now, Yeah, it's up on a hill. And there's some photographs showing Ed Moody in that street. And so it's kind of interesting. I'd love to look in the background of the pictures and see what's there. Now, one of the stories I heard about this, and I don't, maybe Dave, you told me about that. What's the story of that guy during World War II?
Which one?
Of the guy who had the big house. I think that's what somebody told
You
me.
mean Johnson place?
Yeah.
No,
Sturtevant.
Sturtevant? Yeah.
Because, oh, that was Doc Sturtevant.
Right. But somebody told me there was a story about why. Okay, so let me zip forward and back a little bit. So, so the dogs, the Chinooks, have gone to Maine, but the Sealeys really should get credit. Though that should say the World Center of Alaskan Huskies and Malamutes, because she put them on the AKC, list, and she did all kinds of stuff. She wrote that book, and then she also wrote books about Huskies and Malamutes. And anybody know Chet Bickford or knew Chet Bickford and Helen? Do you know the story about going out to Montana? Oh, I heard all these wonderful stories. Again, I don't know how true they are, but there was a reason, and I thought it had to do with this house, but it had to do with somebody up here in Wonalancet. So they were raising military dogs, and they ran into a problem, and they thought this Wonalancet was not a good place to raise military dogs. And Chet and Helen got married, and their honeymoon was a secret. Their honeymoon was in a boxcar with 100 dogs going to Rimini, Montana, with the 10th Mountain Division, because he was a sled builder. There's still some of his sleds down in the
That
South
wasn't
Pole.
Chet Bickford, though.
It wasn't Chet?
No, that's, Dicey.
Dicey, okay. See, this is why I love to get these stories. So there is a story about going out with the dogs. Wasn't there something about a guy with a radio?
Oh, that was Seward Collins, that's the different story.
Okay.
That's Peggy's house.
Okay, you want to tell us that story? But I understood that was part of why they thought it wasn't safe to have military.
Well, there's a guy that's
dogs.
read the whole FBI file, he got it through the Freedom of Information Act, and I don't know how seriously that guy took him. I don't think they took him very seriously. So
No,
Seward Collins was an American fascist. He published a magazine that wrote articles very complimentary to Mussolini and even to Adolf Hitler. And with the coming of Pearl Harbor, he was in big trouble. The magazine was already out of business. And he was actually brought before the grand jury, but was never indicted for treason. And he moved first to Wisconsin, where there's a lot of German Americans. And fascism wasn't his actual favorite thing, it was actually monarchy and feudalism. And he was hoping to come somewhere where he could have something like that. And he came up here, he had the manor house for himself on the hill, and he had the farm.
Seven Hearths?
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
And he had the farm, which is Helen's, where the feudal people could raise their crops and so forth. He had a lot of money, of course, because he wasn't earning any. It was all inherited from a chain of tobacco stores his father had owned. And he did have these radios. They were for listening to German broadcasts, but he'd actually, I'm not sure he was operating them that much up here. He was using them in New York. He was recording the broadcasts, and he offered them all to the Navy. He was trying to get out of trouble, and they weren't that interested, of course. But I don't think he was a serious security threat.
Okay.
He was kind of a character. I mean, he was an interesting person up here. But
So it's interesting how these stories filter through, because the way I heard it was that he was a Nazi spy, and he was radioing between here and the U-boats, and he was reporting on the military operations. Yeah.
Well, his butler was German, and Butler's sister was the cook, and because I knew both Mr. and Mrs. Collins, and who were raised with their stepchild, and he paid for the school and the teacher and everything up there as well at the school. And but all these rumors went around because they had it turned out the butler, because the butler did everything, but he had been in told the story where he was in Hitler's army, but he didn't like it, and they had to stand one time there so long that he wet his pants while he was there. He was so bad. No way is this guy, I think, ever anything elderly, but you know how things were. I
Right.
lived through the whole Second World War, and you know, it didn't take much to make stories
Yeah.
fly around and so
So you're saying he wasn't competent enough to be a spy?
I would say that. They seem to be very intelligent about people. But
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
You know, it just didn't happen. I mean, when they came down, my family, was leasing the farm that Helen owns now, and they bought two Marjorie Darkness, bought out the lease, and we moved back down where we used to live, in Marshall is now. And, but it was, my father worked there for, like, they had three teams of horses, all a little bit different size. One day, just for something fun to do, he hooked up all three teams to a manure spreader and took around, because he'd been a teamster for years, so, but also a dog. My father was the first kennel master for the Chinook kennels, as everybody else knows it.
The Sealy one?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And the Sealy's had, you know what, I can't tell you which Weymouth is the daughter that has the house up back of
Laura.
Laura, okay. Mr. Sealy was fixing that up, because he was painting it all up and so forth, nice up there. And he left, went down to the Mount Whittier Station in West Oxley to pick up shot. And when they come back, the place was all aflame.
Oh,
It burned down, and it never did get used again until Laura did something about that.
Alrighty, so here she is letting the dog out for a little bit of run, so we can watch some more.
For their daily exercise.
Tug loves to do that too. It's interesting when we see these, the behaviors are very similar. You notice the curled tails, the dark muzzles, the nose, and darkness on the tips of their ears.
A litter of puppies.
So even when they're babies, they have those distinctive markings.
All doing nicely.
So dark ears,
And
particularly the tips of the ears.
But it won't be long before each pup.
The eyebrows, we used to always joke that our daughter would say, "Did you put eyeliner on top?" Because it always looked like an eyeliner. Watch when they come up there. You see, doesn't it look like that eyeliner on?
And can walk pretty
Oh,
steady.
God.
Although their hind legs are
I'm sorry
still a
about
bit
this.
long. Somewhat skeptical of the snow at first, its softness soon pleases them. A warm little coat of fluffy fur keeps off the chill and makes playing in the snow.
They do love the snow, and I think as Debbie, my wife, explained, they have two layers of coat. And so they're like beavers. The outer coat is long, thin hairs and sheds the water, and then the inner coat is like soft, downy. So when Tug comes back in, you can just dig your fingers in, and he loves it. Like I say, curly tails.
Still become a little scared when she tries to teach them
They do.
to be on their
The
own.
outer or the inner? Or both?
Both, everything, the whole place, yeah. You gotta get a snow shovel and clean the bathroom.
She soon finds out, though, that it isn't easy to get away from this bunch, not even for a minute.
So you can see again, the big blocky head. But,
Look how much snow there is.
yeah, wouldn't that be nice to have that? Okay, you can pause it for a second.
As for
So this is part of the training.
keep them to
Now, does anybody have an idea who that guy might be?
the trainer at the command of one word.
That's one. Okay, stop it right there if you can. So there you can see the big house sturdiment place in the background. You can't see it now because of the trees. And
That's
Can you have 30 seconds on that?
yeah, tell us.
Okay, so it was
It's the story.
built in 1855 by a young man who grew up in my house and moved across the road. And he actually built a small one-story, not a 1.5-story cape, further to the north a little bit, down sort of where the driveway is that goes up there.
Okay.
There's an old tennis court on the left.
Yep.
And then he gave it up in 1895 after farming there for 40 years. And it was bought by a woman out of Boston. Last name was Powell, I forget her first name. And she had her, I presume her cousin, had the same last name, Howe, Lois Howe, who was one of the first women's architects down in Cambridge. She came up and redesigned the house. They took the house up on the knoll and took the L off of it and swung it around to the south side, what you're seeing there. And she had it until mid-20s or 1930s. She married a doctor from New York, started spending all the time in New York, wasn't coming up, but she had a daughter who about 1930 started coming up and found it altogether way too small for her and her friends and their servants.
I can see that, yeah.
So they took the L and pushed that way to the left, added a formal dining room sort of in the middle. And in the section to the left, I think, was for the servants, and the middle section was for the guests and the dining room. And kept that, so in the second generation, quite a bit before the servants came along.
Chinook's Children, which is the name of the film. The book is called Chinook and His Family. And so Chinook's Children you can think of as just his original children, or you can think of as all the descendants. So there's about 1,200 registered Chinooks today in the world, everywhere from China, Europe, here in America. And so, as I said, there's this descendant concept. But then there's also, if you want to think about the sort of the Chinook Trail, it starts in Tamworth Village, comes up here. But again, it really, because of the Mingo, the mother, goes all the way from the North Pole to the South Pole. And not only that, Wonalancet has other sort of Chinook-related legacies. And anybody remember that place?
Yeah.
So you see, that is that same image that's there, and that's in the book. I think it's like page 3. And so this is Tug when he was a little kid, and he wanted to learn all about genealogy and stuff. And so we took him here, and he was like, well, this seems familiar, but it's not really where I came from. So he actually came from over there, not here. So remember, there's a book, Lies My Teacher Told Me, kind of like that. It's not made really crystal clear that that's not, what's going on there. Let's see if I can find another image here. The way I thought about introducing this was to use this little image. Anybody know what that is?
Falcon's fly.
Go ahead, say it. Don't be shy.
Falcon's fly.
Yeah, which one?
I don't know. What is it, Jim?
It's the most famous one.
Gray Ghost.
Gray Ghost, yeah, that's the Gray Ghost. If you guys look around, these things go for over $1,000 now. He used to buy them, I don't know what he sold them for, but he used to make these. So he was, Wendell Falcons lived down the street, used to do those. Well, here's a whole bunch of them. All right, now I wanted to get to this image. And see if I can. All right. So, again, going back to the idea of Arthur Walden, and I don't have time to go into everything, but I can show you pictures of Kim and Mingo. Walden had actually started with another set of dogs, 4 dogs. So he came from Alaska, he had all these experiences, and he married Kate Sleeper, and they operated the inn, the Wonalancet Inn. And so we've been here 20 years this year. When we came here 20 years ago, there was not a single zip line in New Hampshire. And now every place has one or two or more zip lines. So the idea there was, how do you get your guests to come here? Tennis courts, golf courses, hiking trails, Big Rock Cave, stories by the fireplace, music. And Walden said, hey, let's have sled dog rides. All right, so the problem is the racing dogs are like athletes, and they're not really too cool about people or other dogs. They are athletes, and one thing, you have to feed them really high, and you have to work them, and that becomes your life. So he's like, well, let's try find a dog that's really friendly with people and doesn't bother other, dogs, but can pull and do okay. So he had his first set were Bernese Mountain Dogs, and there were 4 of them, and their names were Rude, Yard, Kip, and Ling. So that's an interesting story, but they were okay. If you know Bernese Mountain Dogs, they do pull, and they're kind of fun. But he wanted to play with the instinct and try and get the right dog. When the border collie, you see this in Freiburg Fair, herds the sheep, he's doing it with a prey instinct. He's thinking, well, his instinct is, I will catch them and eat them. So the farmer works it out with whistles or commands that if the dog goes this way, the sheep go that way, right? And opposite. But the problem is, again, border collies, they can be good pets, but with other animals, because he did have a farm, they're going to be chasing the geese and kids and so on and so forth. So he went with, and we don't know if he knew that Kim had this, or if he just got to know Kim. But when we did the DNA, we found out that the most common, and you probably know what it is, heterozygous or heterozygous, something with genes and DNA and this and that. Anyway, they were able to trace that the #1 lineage of this breed of dogs is this dog here. Anybody know? There's one in Tamworth Village. At least it used to be. Uses had one. Pilot. Anybody know Pilot? Okay. Now, we're talking about history and how it relates. It's very interesting. I don't, maybe this was all destined, but my wife and I went to an interview in New York City, and instead of going to lunch with this professor we wanted to meet, we went to this little, got a sandwich and interviewed with this couple, and we were offered a job to teach in Turkey. So we went to Turkey, we spent an academic year, and we saw this all over the country. And she has one of these things in the car. And what this is a capennic, and it's a big, thick, felted thing that the guy wears as a coat. And so here you have this big dog, and you notice the ears and the muzzle and the eyes. All right, so what happens, it's the Kurdish Kangal or the Anatolian sheepdog. So instead of them thinking that the sheep are food, and I'm going to chase them, they're brought up in the pack, in the herd. And obviously they're small, so they're accepted, they're no threat. This is an Angora, which comes from the word Ankara, which is where we live. But something magically happens with these dogs. They get a little bigger. But they've bonded now. So the dog has bonded with the sheep. Big brother. Really big brother. These are, and look how much they look like the original Chinook. Picture there. Really big. They're one of the, if not the largest dog breed. Anatolian sheepdog. Now, so here's the herd hanging out, the flock. And here's the sheepdog. And the master says, let's go. And instead of the dog chasing the sheep follow Big Brother. And so this, in a sense, and I'll show you a couple more quick pictures, gives you the sense Tug thinks everybody is his friend. And doesn't matter the size, small or large, very, very gregarious and so on and so forth. So here you have the dog, a couple of them, and they follow. So it's a absolutely opposite concept of controlling the flock. And you see these things, they go on for miles, and the sheep follow the dogs. Now, so that way, with whistles and calls, you can control 1,000 sheep through that bonding. The other thing is that in this flat Anatolian plain, like the steppes, are some nasty characters. So there's two things that these dogs and the Chinooks will do. They put 3-inch spiked collars on them. And Big Brother, if anybody comes along nasty, will attack and protect his brothers and stuff like that. So it's very interesting to, so that wolves and bears and things like that. So that's how, so it's a totally different concept. The border collies want to eat the sheep. And you have to slow that instinct down so they don't eat. So anyway, I think that's kind of an interesting component to the whole thing. Is that, and again, I don't know the story. I do know that that's the #1 dog that is in the genetic makeup of the Chinooks. And we know the character. And so, you know, at some point, Walden could sense this. And the other thing is that Mingo was a husky, a very small dog, and Kim was very big. And there's this thing in genetics and breeding that Chinook and his brothers were called sports. So their dominant genes were then able to recreate and make all their kids look very similar. So that's just part of the story. So a little tangent. All right, let's move on.
Do we know who that guy is in the picture?
I think it's Bob Payne. We'll talk about that in a little bit when we get to a different part.
Without the aid of any line.
So he's training the.
And no harness is put on the dogs, and they are hitched to a sled for the first time. At the called gate for go, they are pulled along the road to demonstrate what the word means.
That's Lock Falls Road.
Teaching the dogs to make a complete turn.
My barn on the left.
The cry, "Walk, come in," means turn on the left.
A lot of snow there.
Please come in.
Yeah.
On the right.
113.
I think another part of the show is Lock Falls Road there.
The dogs are driven entirely by verbal commands without
think
breaking
that's
the
what they're
orders
doing?
of any kind. And it doesn't take long for these bright animals to catch on.
I think there's apple trees in there.
In spite of general belief, the lead dog is not necessarily the biggest of the team.
So I'll show you this a little bit later. I don't want to take too much away from the film.
He has many
This,
responsibilities in addition
this
to
image of these dogs lined up like this was later made into a postcard, and that's why I think that's Bob Kane. So that's called the neck line that goes to the neck, obviously, and then the line that comes back is called the tug line, and that's where Tug gets his name from. But like right around there, there were a whole bunch of still photos taken when the movie was made.
And now they've arrived at the ski slope.
You want to just stop there for a second?
Operated by none other than Hamish.
Okay, so we were in Wonalancet. Does anybody know where we are now?
Emily.
Ready?
Kitty Hill.
No?
North Conway.
Conway, Cranmore.
That's what I said, Cranmore.
Oh, I'm
Kitty
sorry.
Hill.
Yes.
It was the whole time it was Kitty Hill.
So, see, I didn't know that, so that's a new one for me. So this is Hannes Schneider, who also, didn't, as your friend, didn't get along with the Nazis or Hitler. Anybody want to tell that story? Anybody know that story? So Schneider was not a Nazi, and he apparently, I mean, Tom Eastman's the expert on this up at the Conway Daily Sun, but basically he spoke out against the Nazis, the rise of the Nazis, and he was put under house arrest. And
He's Austrian, right?
yes, he's Austrian, from St. Anton, I think it is. And he, a bunch of people from here, Carol Reed, and especially Harvey Dow Gibson, had gone there into Europe to learn to ski, and this was like apparently a really phenomenally different way of downhill skiing. Does anybody know the story more than that?
That was the Elberg technique.
Yeah, Arlberg, yeah, that's it.
Elberg.
And so, anyway, long story short, Harvey Dad Gibson was this big banker, and they had loaned money to the Nazis. And he was able to do some backdoor deals and smoke-filled rooms, and he got this guy, Hannes Schneider, and some of his other guys, Tony Matt and Benno Rubitsky and some of those guys, to come over here and started the Eastern Slope Ski School and Cranmore. So he's like a really, really famous guy. I mean, him and his classes were the reason that people would take the snow trains up from Boston for the weekend. Oh. Sorry about that.
Yeah, Norton's not gonna let me go here.
All right, so, and it's interesting, just a quick little thing. When I was trying to figure this out, I was thinking, was this Edge Hill or was this Page Hill? Or, you know, and my son walked by and says, that's Cranmore. So anyway, so we, you know, this is cutting and pasting from the different things. You also notice the sled's gotten bigger. So now it's a freight sled or a big sled for giving rides. Okay. Well,
The great skiers of all time.
these guys smoke while they're skiing. I just think that's so, look at him smoking. There's another guy later on smoking. So that's Cranmore, the other guy giving rides. Eastern Slope in Cranmore. Used to give rides. Yeah. Now, does anybody know, raise your hand if you know any of these characters here.
We could just nobody.
Snow buddies, yeah. On that, so they put a bearskin rug on them. The Snow Bunnies, there's another film called The Conway Boy, which was done in the 40s. And the kid talks about the Snow Bunnies, and he says, well, what are Snow Bunnies? So now they're going out on Echo Lake, frozen Echo Lake with Cathedral Ledge in the background. So they've gone from Cranmore, you know, a mile or more across the valley to the other side. Now they're in the woods, and this is the dumping scene, and the sign in the background says, no dumping per order of selectmen. So see the sign? Yep. No dumping per order of selectmen. So they, you know, and it was funny because, you want to pause it for a sec? So when you guys, I was watching you guys watch the movie, and you know, you can really tell this was put together by somebody who really had a sense of like, okay, every 3.5 minutes we got to have a laugh, then we got to have a little sexism, and then we got to have, you know, something, yeah.
That Ford van there was Julia Lombard.
Oh, that was Julia Lombard?
Yes, and she had that until almost the time she died in Wonalancet. She seems like she did that forever. She used to go around long after dogs lived. She used to do people's mow some lawns and flower gardens, do flower gardens and so forth, and she'd take the stuff around in the back of that.
Wow. That's a really cool piece of information. So now we're going north on 113A, right? Is it?
Going down to church.
There's the chapel. So we're in this building right here. All right.
Where's the camera on that? Have they got the camera on some kind of a crane or something?
That's another thing. You can do a whole film school type thing, like, you know, where they showed the dog view. Somebody's, you know, they didn't have GoPros there, so what do they do? You know, you're talking about these big motion picture things. I mean, somebody's sitting on that sleigh somehow, you know, laying down or something. There's some really interesting shots. Okay. So this guy's smoking too. All right, stop if you can. I don't know if you can, but you can't see it in this one, but in the higher resolution, that hat says TOC. Woo! Anybody hazard to guess what that means? Tamworth Outing Club. What about the Woody? Anybody know about that? I think that was Carol Reed's. Yeah, he had a Woody like that, and he had carved in to all these rails pictures of skiers and stuff like that.
There's several around the end of
Yeah.
it.
So I don't know if that was the one. Okay. Does anybody know who this guy is? He's starting the race. He's like the, he puts his hand down.
Official. And then may have come from out of town, he'd been
Yeah.
part of
Okay.
the
Nathan, is that
responsibility.
High Mason?
Could
Is
be.
that High Mason?
Well, when I knew him was all a little stockier than that.
I was going to say, he's a little shorter too,
His
maybe.
face doesn't look flush or whatever you want to call it. No.
High Mason was Karen Jones's grandfather.
Yeah,
Karen Jones is the one who made that
And
sled.
high race,
Yeah, High was a big
before my
race.
time, but I
Yeah.
knew high, but I never knew when he raced.
Okay.
Is that near like the lodge thing?
So as I said, they're taking off in 3-minute intervals. This is short Sealy there. Now, if you want to pause it there, how long is that part of your complex?
Yeah.
Okay. Because there's like, it's a little
That's the
clear,
green,
like a
green
screen-in porch type thing, or
That's the green cottage looking east.
what's it called?
We're looking east, not green cottage.
Green?
That's what we always called it.
It's the little house on the
I lived in
top.
it at one time when I was little.
When you were green, you.
Was it painted green, or is it,
Yes, it was.
painted green?
Oh,
But at
okay.
least the pimples were green.
The
and,
guy going into the car with a cigarette, that was my father.
Oh, that was your father, and that was Richard?
Buzz Reed, Richard.
Richard Buzz Reed. Okay.
So wait, when, did that just, let's go back and look. Where was that?
Smoking the cigarettes.
Smoking the cigarette.
Getting out of the car with the dogs.
Okay. Now, did he work with Julia Lombard, or
No,
he did his own thing, right?
They had the house that the franchise on now.
Okay.
And, I think it was just right,
Oh, it was,
Just back up a little on the car.
Before that.
so it's just him in the snow and he's opening the back of the truck.
yeah,
Yeah, okay, so it's
and
back
I
there.
could just tell from the stance.
It's coming up in a second. Oh, they did count. You can actually, for those of you who don't know, you can actually drive to the top of that ledge. A beautiful view. Take a ride. So they're poking fun at New Englanders, I
I
guess.
think it was before that.
Hey, Bob, one thing you left out was that, I think it's probably that one that you said was led by a mongrel.
Yes.
Because the story goes,
That's-
I got it
that's
from
Buzz.
Vic- I got it from Vic Bolton, and whether he got it from my father, my father worked there before he did. But,
Yeah.
somebody sent this dog up to Walden, and of course they took him off at the Mount Whittier station.
Yeah.
And there was nobody there to take him, so they just hooked her to one of the old freight wagons, that
Yep.
carry the baggage back and forth and so forth. Well, before he came to pick her up, some stray dog came along and bred it.
So not the dog that was intended.
No.
Okay. And didn't your mom tell you that story?
No, Dick Moulton told me.
Oh, Dick Moulton told you that
In
story.
fact, as I told you earlier, my father was the first kennelman.
Right.
So my father never told me that. Dick Moulton was the one that told me that.
Ah,
But
that's
so how my
interesting.
father and mother met was that the Steelys had two teams, they were racing,
Yeah.
and my father's senior year over at Plymouth High School, he decided to quit school and go racing dogs. He had several sled dogs, but he went and got his own. He went and got a few strays out, put them in his team, trained them. In fact, the way they got over here to race, he just drove them
Wow.
over the road. But anyway, to make a long story short, he was beating Sealy's best team. So they figured if they couldn't beat him, they'd hire him. So he hired him. And he raced the best team, the A team, after that. And the team that went in the Sealy team that went into the
Olympics.
32 Olympics,
Yeah.
okay,
Lake
Norman
Placid.
Baum actually drove that, but my father's team Norman Vaughn wasn't much of a dog guy, well, never was, if you asked my father or Dick, but anyways, they wouldn't allow my father to race because they considered him a professional. And so Robin went and raced, and then just shot, she raced.
Yeah, she was on the third, I think she was. This was the Olympics in Lake Placid.
Yeah, kind of tryout type of thing.
Yeah, it's like a demo, so it was, that's interesting. I'd never heard that story before. That's pretty cool. There's a lot of stories about Norman Vaughn. He was one of the guys that went down to the South Pole with Walden.
Yeah, he tested bird until he...
Yeah. And he was a Harvard guy, right? Wasn't he one of the three?
I'm not sure, but I think he was...
I think it was Crockett, Goodale, and Vaughn were from Harvard. And
is that where Crockett was tested?
Yeah. And I think one of the books... So, there are a lot of these stories that I've heard orally, and I've made notes and recorded, but then there are also is a whole stack of books, literature, and one of the books talks about, I think it's by a guy named Adams, who was one of the people on the expedition, and he says something about these three guys, if it's the ones I'm thinking of, 3 musketeers from Harvard. He said that at least 2 of them their fathers were millionaires, and but he said that they got all the rest of the guys to start speaking with a Harvard accent. And he said something about even the dogs take on a more erudite air when they're around those guys. So that's kind of an interesting story. Another story that I heard about is that those guys, they came up here and just basically they had read in the paper that Walden was going to be the leader for the dogs, and they took a break from school and came up here and just knocked on the door and said, "We want to go to the South Pole with you." And says, "I'm fine. Where are you staying?" And they just looked at each other and said, "Okay, you guys can stay in the bar with the dogs." And then they became, quite good friends and stuff like that. Did anybody know or hear stories of Crockett, Goodale, or Vaughn? Vaughn particularly was interesting. There was a mountain named after him in the South Pole, and I think he was something like 89 years old. He never actually climbed it, and so he went down when he was 88 or 89 years old, and finally got to climb his mountain. Okay.
That's also my mom's dog, Scamp.
How do you spell it?
Scamp.
S-C-A-M-P? Cool. This is so great. I'm never gonna lie. Okay.
So was he going to race his own team, or was he working for Julia Lombard? Or?
He and my mom both did 3 dog teams, I think. And this is really a long time ago.
Yeah.
And he's young. He's got no gray hair in that vehicle.
Go ahead.
Yep.
Many teams are entered in this yearly race, which is one over a 20-mile circuit.
So there's the TOC hat. Very nice fashions too. I think the jackets.
They take off at 3-minute intervals.
So there's Short Sealy with a very distinctive parka that she wears. So see, these are Huskies, most of these. So this, you think, or this is your mom? So there's Short again. Another thing to watch, how many of you guys have seen dog races before? Okay, so most of you. So one of the things that I like to think about is when we go to the race, and sometimes we'll volunteer help hold them, they're just going bonzo. And then you'll see they're just jumping crazy. And is he here? Oh, okay, yeah. Tug does that, just crazy. But then what I love is from all that barking and snapping and just jumping, when they let go, it's just perfectly still and quiet. And it's just a phenomenal change in the experience. So watch particularly this light-colored dog here.
And then you got people, Bob, that say that we're being nasty to dogs,
Oh yeah, no. That was one of the things when we were tied. We were just like, well, how do you get him to go? And the guy who helped us, Rick, said,
just get out of the way.
Yeah, he said, your problem's not going to be getting him to go. Your problem's going to get him to stop. So here's a group of people. Anybody know any of these people? So I know it's a little hard to see.
You know what year this was called?
I think it was 39. Is that what you're saying, Doug? 39?
Yeah.
1939? Well, we can look at some better, higher resolution videos later.
The race, we have newspaper articles about the race, and it was in February '39.
Was this the one that Bill Shearer won?
Yes. I don't know if it's the only one he won, but he did win.
Oh,
He's
no,
the
he
only one.
was.
That's
I
Bill
know
at
when
the
I was a
end?
teenager, but.
Okay.
This was a national championship. This was one of the regular race. So, or a New England championship or something. It's a championship race.
Bill was still racing after the
Anybody know
war,
where
when
that
he
is?
first started up.
I don't know. It could well be up in Conway, but it's hard to say. I mean, I wasn't able to see that. So
It's not
they're
very
going
well
through some
road,
pretty
but
thick
yeah.
snow. One of the things that's interesting about this sled, now this one here, the Karen Jones sled, is based on a design by Moody. And where'd Debbie go? Deb? Can you bring the Moody in? So all the sleds are very distinctive. Yeah, if that's okay with you guys, wherever you are. This one is a modification named after his daughter Roz. So this is a sprint sled. It's a very short sled with not a full bed. It's only a half bed, so you can get small people in there and they can put their feet there. You actually drive it from back here, as you've seen in the videos. You see what he's doing with his foot? He's actually dragging his foot, and that is one way to help move the sled and control the sled. The other thing, of course, is his brake. And then we also have so you see the circle there? That is a very distinctive figure
Face to
of
face?
the Moody. Yeah. Put it right next to each other. But this one's interesting. So, and I can show you more pictures and stuff. So this front part is called the brush bow. It is the part that hits the tree. So this one has not hit a tree, but ours has. So it's been split a couple times, and we've kind of fixed it up a little bit. And then this is the driving bow here. So that's sort of the handle. And what's interesting, this has actually fallen off our car, because I didn't do it right. It was 70 miles an hour or something like that.
Whoa.
But it's, you know the story, the oak breaks but the willow bends? So the way it's tied together, the force hits this, and because it's connected all together, not rigid, but with lashings, as you see here, the force just moves through there and doesn't shatter it to pieces. So that's one of the important factors about it. Now, you see these use the bow as the handle, but this one's interesting because he actually has a separate little handle. Up there, it's a little hard to see. And he has a distinctive design. Instead of a flat back, he has a curved back. So I don't know who made these. And then if you look at the Bickford sleds that are in South Pole, they're yet a different design. But you can see, like, for instance, this sled is a little bit longer. But it still has the same basic components. It has a brake, so that's just a little metal piece that gets down. Has a place to stand on the runners. But so he is, see how he's dragging his foot?
There's a different brake that goes in here.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, how do you get that shot with a big camera? Good question, yeah.
Wasn't there a guy in Center Harbor or some other town in this area named Sims who was famous for building sleds, expedition sleds?
There was a Sims. Yeah, that's Mount Washington. So I think they're back up in Conway. Maybe on Cranmore, which is the Black Mountain Trail, or maybe they're going along. But yeah, they're back up in Conway again. Did somebody want to? Yeah.
No, I was just going to tell you, you talking about different sleds. Every sled maker makes them all a little bit different.
Yeah.
Stop at my house sometime and I'll show you 4 sleds that my father and brother built. And it's just different. But the one thing that you brought up, which is good, because they aren't rigid, and that's
Right.
beautiful.
You have to be able to, see if I can pull up something real quick. See how short his foot rails are, but how long his bed is and how it curls up? Those both have openings. So it's just a completely different design. So here's the different parts, the footboards. This is a Moody. A lot of times they had a blue on them. But again, you see the circle, or oval, or whatever you want to call it.
You're not using rawhide now either.
Right, it's changed. This is an earlier one. Using the rawhide, you work it wet,
Yes.
and then it dries tight. At the same time, there's a feature that cabinet makers use. If you put your part of your woods, the mortise and the tenon. So the tenon is like a tongue, goes in to the mortise. And so if you dry in the sun or by the fire, the part that goes in, and then you have this green or wet, what happens is then it goes to the ambient humidity. And so what happens is the one part gets bigger and the other part shrinks. So you don't need glue or nails or anything, and you'll never be able to take it apart. And yet, because it doesn't have any nails, it has that ability to absorb that shock and all that kind of stuff. So here's the team. Talk a little bit about the lead dog, the point dogs, swing, and we have another dog that runs with Tug, and he's a wheel dog. The thing about the wheel dogs is they have to be very loyal, very obedient, but they don't have the greatest view, and they're not the sharpest tool in the shed. They're strong, they get you that initial pull. The lead dog really doesn't pull a lot of weight. He's just figuring out what's going on. And I remember one time we were going across Lake Chicorowa with my daughter, and I was at one end and Ted was going straight towards us. And all of a sudden, he veered off and went around like that. And we went back later on and we found out somebody had was ice fishing. And there was a hole. And we're like, how in the world did I do that? And it's just amazing. And when I do the South Pole thing, there's a lot of examples of that where they can figure out crevasses and stuff like that. Do you want to tell them the difference between a wheel dog and a lead dog and the couch?
The couch?
The couch. The
Oh, what he
difference.
does in the couch?
Yeah.
Oh, Tug. We had Tug before we had another dog, and we made, whatever, the mistake of letting him sit on the couch. And one side of the couch is his side of the couch. Well, if the other dog gets up there, we thought at first it was one time it was just happened, but he does it all the time. If Fenway's up on the couch and Tug wants to get there, he goes gets his favorite toy and acts like he wants to play. And then Fenway's like, play, play, and so he jumps down. Tug plays with him maybe at most 30 seconds, and then he gets on the couch. And then Fenway's like, aren't we playing?
What happened?
And he does it a lot. He also knows what time we're supposed to go to bed, because if I'm on the couch and it's his bedtime, he comes and he sits on top of my chest or lays on me or stares at me until I get off the couch and he can go to bed.
Yeah. We have so many stories. I don't want to keep you all night, but just a real super quick one. You might have seen a slide there with Chester Holleran, and his dog, Little Bear, Burr, was the first AKC champion, Chinook. But, the dogs are always loving and around you and stuff like that. But all of a sudden, Burr got really, really attached to Chet. And then about a few weeks later, Chet started feeling not too good. Went to the doctor, and he found out he had cancer. So somehow the dog knew, and he stayed right by his side, slept with him and everything. Never slept with him before, but from that moment on, slept with him and everything. Somehow, maybe smell. They have maybe senses that we don't know. And so this is Karen Jones, who made the sled, and Joel Nordholm, who did an apprenticeship with her, and he learned from Ed Moody. So here's a couple different sleds. This is a plastic runner for a longer sled.
Toboggan sled.
Toboggan sled, yeah, and that's what I'll show you in a second. But so if you look here, it says Narak Sleds and Narak Kennels. And Chinook, it means warm west wind in the Inuit language. And so I asked Karen one time, I said, so Narak, what does that mean? It sounds like, does anybody know?
Karen.
It's my name spelled backwards. So, this is my son making his sled with her, and you can see it's much bigger, and so he was making this toboggan sled, so he did an apprenticeship with her to learn how to do it. And we have all the stages that he did on YouTube showing how you make the pieces and stuff. And so there's a couple things. It's such a great picture, and one of the things is really honor her memory. So the wood is ash, and in the video it talks about it. So you have to bend it, and so it has this grain, these fibers that allow you to bend it. But you need really good, high-quality ash, straight wood. So how many of you guys know Rosie's restaurant? Around here? So Karen used to go in there early in the morning, and she used to say, I am looking for some good ash. Anybody here got good ash? And these are all logger guys who go in early in the morning, and then they would find a good piece, and they would cut it to her specifications, usually 10 feet, 8 feet, whatever, and drop it in her dooryard. And so she could split it up. You don't saw it, you actually drive it, you split it apart. So, so you take these long pieces, you steam them, you bend them. So she has a metal pipe that you put them in. So how does Karen Jones come up with a steamer? She's not going to go to L.L. Bean and buy one, if you didn't buy one there. So what does she have around the house? Well, she happens to have a bunch of beer kegs. So she gets a beer keg, and she gets a Coleman stove. And that is her Yankee way of making a steamer. So, all right, so let's go back to this. So yeah, I think that's the same rock that he went back before, the other way. So here you are, I love that view. So there must be like land in the sled. So this is, that's Moat Mountain. Can you pause it for a second or go back just a second? So that's again up in Conway, looking west. So he's running south on some trail. But what I wanted to show you is, can you back just up a little bit more?
Back further?
Yeah, back just a little bit. When he comes around the corner, one thing he does is he puts his foot down to help balance him. But he turns his body, I think this way. So, see if this, no, it's still back a little further. So you see he's dragging his foot. Yeah, right there. Maybe this is it. He does a thing called warping his sled. See how he just went that way? So he's actually twisting the sled to keep from sliding off the wrong way. So this is Julia Lombard. She was very well known for wearing this French beret. Okay?
Go?
Yep.
We're back a little bit, we can see that. Turn.
Back in those days, Bob, a lot of these races were all good share of them all around right on the main road. So,
Anybody know any of these folks? So this is Walden here. And he had a very distinctive hat, which is like a Boy Scout hat or Smokey the Bear. It was also known as a lemon squeezer. If you think of the plastic lemon squeezers had the 4 parts and you twist it like that. So they were called lemon squeezer. This woman's kind of interesting. She has a very nicely decorated fur parka. And somebody was telling me that the guy in the, what's that hat called? Yeah, was, he's really tall and big, was Sheriff Welch, but I don't know if that's true or not. But anyway, so that is Walden. You can see he's relatively short.
and there was a rich lady that was big, about that tall. I can't think of her name at this second.
She's very pretty.
Over on Brown Hill Road, something there.
Okay.
like, go now, go the dogs. Make
So that's the one, the guy that people told me was Jim Welch.
Who? Oh, in back there?
Yeah, High Sheriff of
Yeah.
Carroll County.
The tall guy?
Yeah. One of the stories, so Marjorie Harkness wrote a bunch of books. One of them was about High Sheriff. And one of the stories was that, like, I can't remember all the details, so I might make a little bit up. But, so basically, and I've heard this a couple different ways. And Debbie studied folklore, and there are a lot of stories that fit certain patterns. There's actually a analytical book called what, Stith Thompson Motif Index, and it's sort of like, you know, if you've seen Star Wars, a young man has his identity challenged, and so then that's like, you know, A7. So there's all these stories start with A7, and then it goes into a different way, and then he finds, you know, his father, or, you know, whatever. But so, you know, all these different stories are just, you know, they're just fantastic. But one of the stories with Jim Welch was that there was some altercation, and he went to, say, a bar or something like that, and it was around dinner time. And so he broke up the fight, and he said to this one guy, he says, "It's my dinner time. I'm going to go home and have dinner. But I want you to come to the courthouse tomorrow, to the jail, and surrender yourself." And people were so afraid of, you know, they knew that that's what he did. So the guy showed up the next morning, you know, clapped me in irons. I was drunk. And so there's all kinds of stories about that. He would go out and, like I said, he would go to restaurants and he'd bring a bunch of arrest warrants, you know, and pass them around to people. And he had his own way of dispensing justice. So anyway, that's... Okay, you stop here for a second. So yeah, this is a kind of a sexist part. So you say the second one is your mom?
I believe so.
Clara, and the one in the front, you think is Peabody. And then,
Wonalancet sinks.
Yeah.
yes, and so,
No, that's approaching my
That's
house,
Wonalancet.
because that's the
Right.
Tewksbury barn down
right,
there.
right, and now didn't they just restore that or
Yeah.
something? Yeah. We had an open house there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the new one, yeah.
Yeah. Now, which one's the bowl? Is it this one or that one?
The bowl. Well, the first one is Wonalancet, the next one is Hibbard. The one that's going off, which is actually has 2 peaks, is Hedgehog.
Okay.
And the bowl is actually up on the slope of Whiteface behind to the left.
Oh, okay, so back up in here?
Yeah.
Does anybody want to tell the story of the bowl? Because it has to do with Kate Sleeper, who was Arthur Alden's wife.
The story is, which there isn't very much evidence for, that Publishers Paper Company was buying up land and liquidating it, and that Lewis Tainter, who was their timber buyer and treasurer and one of the owners, had plans to log the virgin timber in the bowl and bring it out through Wonalancet down through, probably through Winkley's and the Old Bass Road. And neighbors got word of this, and while he was up here, Kate Sleeper confronted him and said, "Can you give us just a little time on this? Can we get a first option on that land?" And somehow she convinced him to do it, and then they had to raise the money for it, and so she and Marjorie Gain Harkness and Edgar Rich and others worked and raised the money and bought the and got the option, and was able to buy enough time for the National Forest to become a player, because the local people couldn't afford to buy the whole tract, but the forest could, and they bought it for Publishers Paper Company. The only problem with that is the acquisition file, which is very complete, that the National Forest has, doesn't mention anything about this prior obligation. So
that's a good story.
It does. It is Marjorie Gain Harkness who told that story. It was kind of a exaggerator, and so was Walden, and so, you know,
So am I.
you have to be a little careful about it.
Yeah. So yeah, I should tell you, half of what I say is true. So you just have to figure out which half. So there's a picture of Kate Sleeper in the back there, and I think it's Harkness who talks about this experience and that it had to do with Kate Sleeper's indomitable will. And she was short and petite. And I think she talks about like blue eyes, steely blue eyes, and very prim and proper. But she wasn't someone you wanted to mess with. And so when she, stood up to this guy, he knew better than to cut the timber. And that is preserved today, right?
It is.
And you guys have trails in there, and
Well, the trails go around. Yeah, trails go around the outside.
Okay.
It's a research area.
Yep.
Cornell manages it, and they have a local manager here who's a biologist, a PhD on the faculty.
Is it the Tom Wigan Trail?
Doesn't the Tom Wigan Trail go right up the side of that?
Yeah, Tom Wigan is a boundary of the official protected pole.
yeah.
That's how to see it though. Go up to Tom Wigan and look off to your right and walk through there. And there used to be, not that long ago, I mean when I first came here, which wasn't that long ago, there were great big trees of great growth, and all of those have blown down. So it looks a lot like the rest of the forest.
The trees were like this.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing.
I mean, that's a whole nother great thing about this whole area and the Wonalancet Outdoor Club is all these incredible places that have been preserved, and the easement on the fields across the street where you see there, almost, that's on the right. And, so again, the Wonalancet Preservation Association, is that right? Association or alliance?
Association, yes.
Is another very important group to support. So hopefully everybody brought your checkbooks to write tax-deductible donations to WOGC, WPA, THC, and the chapel. The chapel should be another one. Okay, I think we're almost done now.
You're not going to the finish line.
No.
Don't go back to racing either.
Can we see him any better there? Or not really, huh?
Not really. All right, so there we go. As I said, where's the owner of this? Do you want to talk about your sled?
Oh,
Where are you? There you
well,
go.
I brought it, but it's not mine, it's Denny's, yeah. So my aunt, who's in the Antlers, had this made by Ed Moody. And I mean,
He delivered it to me because she was somewhere else. And I got to spend a great afternoon with him talking old days and standing on the edge of that field. There was just so much snow. And it would be blowing at you always, and the excitement of the dogs. I mean, it was just such a scene, really. But anyway, he was a great guy, and it was, my parents were gone by then, so it was just fun talking to him.
Okay. Just want to get a survey. So anybody have any more questions, or how we can come up and take a look at the sled? Is Tug still outside? Or?
He's in my car, I can bring him back in.
We'll see him again and feel his, it's a hands-on thing, so you can take selfies.
And it's just like a horse's bridle, because they should have paid me to test out dog toys and harnesses. Because he's a puller, anything on the back makes him pull, because his harness is from the back. And even they have ones that it's in the middle of their chest, but he is so narrow chest that it would slide off. It didn't work. So we've tried, I don't know how many different harnesses when we first got them, until it was recommended to the halty, because if he pulls, he pulls on his snout. So it's not pulling on his neck. So it's like when you lead a horse. And that controls him a lot better, and it doesn't choke him. Like I said, if I had this hooked up to his collar and he wanted to pull 250 pounds, there he goes. And I can change, how much I can let him go on this.
All right, so back right up.